it's Kayla, and today is Booktubeathon Day 4's video challenge, and that is hosted by Marissa from Little Spider 9. I'm so excited for this challenge. So how it goes is you pretend that you yourself are a teacher and you're coming up with a reading list for your class, and it is a class of your choice, any subject you want on any topic you want. And I just love this idea because I love reading lists for school. Like any person who reads does. Sometimes I don't like reading the books for school, but like reading lists just get me really excited, and I think about sometimes, you know, what would I have on my reading list if I was like an English professor? So this is really exciting. Before I get into my reading list for my class, I just wanted to let you know, as always, my readathon update for the day will be at the end of this video, so stay tuned if you want to check that out. So my class will be a class about fictional stories that feature the decade of the 1980s. I know this might sound a little boring at first, all books that were written in the 1980s. No, not written in the 1980s, books that take place or feature the 1980s, because I have 4 books here to show you that all feature or take place in the 1980s, but they were all written during this current decade of the 2010s. And what this class would do, it would focus on the pop culture in the 1980s and how it's kind of coming back around during this decade, and people are recycling this idea of what was popular then and bringing it into the now, and how a lot of books in YA fiction have come out and they feature the 1980s, and I found it really interesting because I was like, wow, this is a really cool concept, but do I have enough books for this reading list? And I did. I have 4, and I'm really surprised about that. What I also love about this video challenge is that it's kind of a little bit more hard to do, because one of the things you have to do for this challenge is you have to feature one of the books that are on your Booktubeathon TBR on your reading list to kind of spice it up a bit. And the book from my Booktubeathon TBR actually inspired this whole class and reading list overall, and that book is Paper Girls Volume 1 by Brian K. Vaughan. I just read this a couple days ago for Booktubeathon and I absolutely loved it. If you saw my update for the day, you know that I think this one is really cool, and I'm really excited to get to the next volume. Essentially, this first installment in this graphic novel series features 4 girls who run a paper route, and it takes place during 1987, the day after Halloween. And during this day, a lot of mysterious supernatural science fiction stuff starts going on in these girls' hometown in Cleveland, I believe. But what's interesting about it is there are also some time travel things that go on in here, and they kind of talk about the year of 2016 and people that are coming back from the future to 1987, and these girls are like, who are these people, what's going on? So this is the first in the 4 books that I would talk about in the class, because it kind of has the comparison of today's technology and culture with the 1980s and how things have really changed, and this would be a really good introduction into the decade and how it differentiates from today. The second book I have for my reading list does not take place during the 1980s, but features 1980s pop culture heavily, and you might know this already, but it's my favorite book, and that is Ready Player One by Ernest Cline. I had to add this book into my reading list because it wouldn't be a Kayla on Fiction reading list if I did not. Ready Player One features a futuristic era that takes place in 2045, where there is this video game called The Oasis, and it's a virtual reality game where essentially it's taken over everybody's lives, and the real world is kind of become decrepit, and like everybody takes the Oasis and uses it as an escape. People go to school, they have jobs there. But what happens is the creator of this video game dies, and he decides to leave his fortune to one of the players of the game who can find all the Easter eggs, 3 keys and 3 gates that open up to this final Easter egg that reveals his fortune. But the thing about all these clues, in order to get to that point, all feature 80s pop culture and video game references, because that is the decade that the creator grew up in, that he was a teenager in. So kind of like Paper Girls, this is another comparison of today's society, or a more futuristic society, in comparison to the decade of the 1980s, and how it's still really relevant in this story because of how important it is to the main character Wade Watts and him finding this Easter egg and finding the first key, because he's the first one in 5 years who finds the first key, and then he becomes this internet sensation overnight because nobody's been able to do that, to find the first clue in the steps to finding the last Easter egg. So it kind of goes from there, and I think it would be a really good installment in my reading list for my class, because again, the comparison of the 80s decade and this decade and how the culture is recycled again. That's basically what I'm saying. The next book for my reading list I have to show you, I actually just read this book right before the readathons started. Literally the day before the biannual bibliothon started, I read this book. I listened to the audiobook, and this book does take place in the 1980s. Sorry, Paper Girls actually takes place in 1988. This book takes place in 1987, and that book is Aristotle and Dante Discover the Secrets of the Universe by Benjamin Aliri Sands. This book is awesome, and it takes place during 1987, and it features two boys, Aristotle and Dante, who are teenagers during this era. They are 15, I believe, 15, 16. This book was written in 2012, but again, it takes place during the 80s. Another book that would be featured on my reading list. This would cover the ground of societal expectations during this decade, because it does feature two characters that are gay and have a relationship where that is really like frowned upon during the time of the 80s. It was a time where AIDS was a big epidemic back then. People assumed that only people who were gay had AIDS, which is definitely not the case, and just going along with that idea, just comparing it to today and how things have very much changed for the LGBT community. So just another facet of the class that would go along with pop culture, society, political issues. These are all the things that would be dealt with in the class, so this is just another part of that. And the last book I have to show you on my reading list that takes place during the 1980s is Eleanor and Park by Rainbow Rowell. I love this book so much. It takes place during 1986, and it was published, It was published in the year 2013. This is another one that goes along with societal standards and what relates to that, because this book features two characters, Eleanor and Park. Eleanor being an overweight, red-headed white girl who falls in love with a Korean boy, Park, and they bond over being misfits, outsiders. They love comic books and music, and it heavily features comic books and music that were in the 1980s. So it has one aspect of the pop culture in relation to today, as well as societal standards, because a mixed race couple would be looked at very differently during that time period, and how things have drastically changed from then to now. And this is such a good love story. It's awesome, and I really recommend anybody read it if you already haven't. Rainbow Rowell is just the absolute best. What I really like about my reading list is they are all very different books from each other. We have a science fiction book that takes place in the future. We have another book about a gay relationship. We have another book about a mixed race relationship, and a graphic novel that is science fiction. So two contemporaries, two science fictions, but all taking place or featuring the 1980s, and all written during this decade. And I think it's very interesting how these authors utilize this culture and put it into all kinds of different stories and different outlets. So I'd be very excited to see where this goes with my class and teach it and just talk about the 80s pop culture, because I love that decade. If you can't tell, I had no idea I had this many books that were similar to each other but also so different at the same time. And I'd love to have like a book club or something talking about all these books together and actually do a class about it, because that would be awesome. But alas, my English major is not for teaching, it's for publishing, so what can you do? So that is all I have for you today for this video challenge. I love these books, and that's really all I have to say about them. And I'd be very excited to see everybody else's reading lists, because this challenge I was really geeking out about. So without further ado, now I'm going to get into my readathon update for the day. So today is day 6 of the biannual bibliothon and day 5 of the booktubeathon. It is going by so fast. I cannot believe it. As you know, I mentioned yesterday that I was going to be going to the beach, but a certain someone's car had to go to the shop. If you don't remember, Bridget,
it's not my fault.
I'm hanging out with my best friend Bridget. You saw her in my first sentence challenge I was supposed to go with her, but her car had to go to the shop, so we're just hanging out at my house, and she's just sitting here while I record. She's a good friend. Yeah, you're a good friend.
I'm pretty good.
Anyway, so yesterday I barely read. I'm on page 29 of They Both Die at the End. I read 29 pages yesterday, and I haven't read a single page today, and it's already almost 2 o'clock, so that's great. I don't know. I'm not that worried. I'm just going with the flow this readathon season. They Both Die at the End is really good so far, even though I've only read like 30 pages of it, but I am enjoying it. I just really am, this is the time where I start to crash, day 5 or day 6 of the readathons, because it's coming down to the wire and I'm just so tired, and I've just been reading constantly and filming constantly, and I'm just so mentally and physically drained, but I'm gonna still try and push through this book. I at least want to finish this book before maybe Saturday night, because that's when the biannual bibliothon ends, and this book I wanted to complete for the 2 challenges of read a LGBT plus book and read a diverse book, and this also would complete the challenge for booktubeathon of read a book with a character that's very different from you. So hopefully I get to finish this today when this one leaves my house. So, but I'm not kicking her out. That'd be rude, just to read.
What? Are you kicking me out so you can read?
No, I was just saying I'm not going to.
No.
I don't have a lot to say again today because I haven't read a lot. With the 29 pages I read yesterday, I am now up to 1,829 pages that I've read this week. So I'm doing pretty good so far. It's just a slow and steady thing. Slow and steady wins the race in my book. So yeah, that's all I have for you today. I hope everybody is having a productive readathon season so far. Let me know in the comments below if you would read the books that I had for my reading list for the challenge video. Let me know which book you're currently reading, how far you are into the booktubeathon. I am very interested how far you are into the biannual bibliothon. Whatever the case may be, I want to chat about it, see if we're having the same struggles, you know? So that is all I have for you today. I will see you sooner rather than later with a new video tomorrow. Bye!